Hey everybody, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between authors. I've been doing a lot of these lately, and I tell you, we're getting about to number 100, so that's pretty exciting. I always kind of told myself, I'm like, let me do 100 episodes and then see how I'm feeling about it all. And so we're getting close to that 100, but I'm feeling pretty good about it all. I'm actually trying to expand my world that revolves around writing. And by that, I mean, I'm trying to do things besides just writing novels and just writing short stories. And a good example of that is starting this podcast, obviously. But my next iteration, which something I've always wanted to do, and I've never pulled the trigger, and I'm like, damn it, just do it. I'm committing to hosting and teaching 2.5-day workshop/retreat here in lovely Boulder, Colorado this summer. So that entails booking the space, figuring out the curriculum, advertising it, getting a web page done for it, getting payment processing page done for it, making sure people sign up. But the idea behind it, essentially, I've talked to a lot of people, and when they find out you're a writer, countless people say, I've always wanted to write and I've never found the time, or, but just that burning desire, or I've started a book and I just can't finish it. So I'm creating a workshop called The Gentle Novelist. And the idea of it is it's really catering to those people who maybe they have full-time jobs and want to write, but aren't finding the time, but really aren't finding the passion and the focus and the accountability to do so. So it's going to be a workshop that's going to encourage these writers to really propel through that first novel. And it's going to be a mixture of, both talking about the craft and ways to write, although there's a million different ways to write a novel. There's no one way. But it's also about being vulnerable and being accountable and sharing your story and sharing your journey and bonding with fellow writers. And kind of giving yourself permission in a way to write your novel and to get past a fear of failure or a fear of success, or fear of rejection or whatever it is. It's kind of about embracing and confronting what it is that's stopping you from writing that book. If it's something that you've always wanted to do and is truly a dream of yours. So that's what my retreat is going to be focused on. It's going to be in beautiful Boulder, Colorado. So it's going to be a great, a great environment of energy to do this. So once I have that website up, I will make sure to list that in these episodes as well. But if you're at all interested in that, if that's something as you're listening to this podcast, like I always kind of wanted to do that. The dates are going to be August 9th through 11th in Boulder, Colorado. And you can just email me at carterwilson.com for the details as I have them right now. By the time this episode launches, I will probably have those details all set. Anyway, that's what's going on in my world. I want to tell you a little bit about who I talked to today. I talked to Rebecca Keller, who has a debut novel launching April 4th called You Should Have Known. And you're going to hear us talking a lot about this novel. And it's fascinating because it's kind of mystery suspense, but it really takes place in a senior living apartment, and where the protagonist lives in a senior living apartment. So the characters are all on the older side of things, and we talked a lot about ageism in fiction and how it's hard to sell a novel, particularly a mystery suspense novel, where all the characters are old/elderly. So it was fascinating to hear Rebecca's insights into that. And she herself has a really diverse and fascinating background, really heavily focused on teaching and being an artist. So she's actually a Fulbright Scholar and an NEA award-winning visual artist. So she's got creativity for days. And she got to a point in her life where she had kind of been thinking about a book, and like many of my guests, just says, God damn it, I'm going to write this thing. So she calls herself stubborn. So she stubbornly is like, I'm going to start this book and I'm going to finish it, no matter how long it takes. And she did, and it's sold, and it's going to be out in the world on April 4th. So how cool is that? She was fascinating to talk to, lots of good wisdom, and it's always interesting talking to debut authors and hear about their journey and how they got to where they are now. And hers was particularly compelling. So I think you're going to like this one. This is my conversation with Rebecca Keller.
Hi.
How are you? Oh, I like the glasses.
Oh, thanks. Dollar
Pops.
dollars.
Hey, you got your money's worth.
I have like a pile of them, different colors.
Oh, they're cheaters. They're for reading.
Yeah.
I'm not quite there yet. I'm in my 50s, but when I was in my 20s, I got LASIK done. So that has still helped prolong the onset of what is that? Farsight.
Yeah. I think I eventually need to like bite the bullet and go buy like real glasses or optometrist. But in the meantime, these are fun.
Good. As long as they work. So where are you right now? Where do you live?
I'm just in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago. Okay. I'm just outside of Boulder, Colorado.
Nice.
So are you born and raised Chicagoan?
No, actually, I was born and I grew up in Minnesota.
Okay.
In the Twin Cities for the most part, although the character in the book, Franny, is from North Dakota, and I have family on the North Dakota, Minnesota, Canada border. Spent a lot of time there. Colder than a witch's tit, as they say.
Yep.
And so I grew up in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, but I've lived in Chicago for most of my adult life. So I think of it as my hometown.
And as you were, I want to get through a lot of your background before we get to the book, but as you were writing your book, did you find yourself gravitating towards what you know in terms of location and people types, or did you find yourself like wanting to do something totally unfamiliar to you?
I think the character, there's an amalgamation, right? There's certain things that I didn't know, like I don't know anything particularly about medicine beyond a very general kind of thing. But I made appointments with and talked to people who very generously helped me with that, with some of the medical details in the book. There's a few parts mentioned, where the protagonist talks about her girlhood in, North Dakota. And that was from experience.
Sure.
Not that I'm 80, but the coldness and being on the farm and that kind of thing. And then, the setting I think of almost as another character.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Absolutely. Yeah.
And the setting is loosely based. I mean, when I was very young, I worked in a kind of a care facility. This facility is kind of loosely based in a general way on the place where my mother moved to before her death.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
And so, and actually that kind of really helped me seal, drop the pieces into place, because I realized a setting like that was very rich because it was kind of closed, but there was new people all the time who didn't necessarily have much of a future, but that, were in this sort of setting where they were having to deal with one another, and they all had a lot of baggage. Everybody that age has a past and baggage. So it struck me as a really fertile place to think about where someone's past might come back to haunt them in a way that
totally. Yeah. So a little bit more extreme and a little bit different, but my father entered a memory care facility at a pretty early age, in his mid 60s. So we would go visit him, and to your point, there are so many disparate personality types, and at least in a memory care facility, like who they are now might not be who they were. And that is kind of interesting as well.
Yeah.
And they are all in each other's business all the time. Whether it's a lack of memory or lack of inhibition because of their maybe dementia or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you would hear these stories that are like, oh my God, that's, it's kind of fascinating and sad and sometimes inspiring as well.
Right, right. And it's also, sort of like, well, where is the truth of this? I mean, that's always the case in any sort of closed thing. It's like
Right.
at the middle school, which version is the closest to the truth. But with people whose maybe perceptions are clouded, it's even more like,
Right.
what's
Right.
really going on?
And did you, I find it interesting to have, suspense mystery set with, septuagenarians, octogenarians. It's not that common. And it's funny because there are these kind of, I don't even know if you want to call them tropes, but there's almost these rules of thumb a little bit about the sweet spot of an age of a protagonist in that type of a book. And it usually ranges between like 30 and 45.
Right.
And because I've gotten pushback on writing too young. And so I wonder was it difficult for you to present this and have people like, well, the audience maybe doesn't want to read about it. I don't know, because I hear these things every now and then.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that, actually. I mean, yeah, originally when I wrote Franny, she was a little older. And she was 80. And what was funny is some of the there's a few one advanced reviewer saying, she read as older to me. But I had all these agents tell me, I love this book, but I don't think I can sell a book with a protagonist who's older.
Yeah.
And I thought,
isn't that weird? It's like actual sexism and ageism, in fiction.
And I kind of thought, who do you think reads books?
Right.
Because as you know, her daughter, who's a middle-aged woman, is a significant character in the book, and who really read books? Middle-aged women.
Yeah.
Totally. And whose mothers are, perhaps, in a different stage of life, and it struck me as a real failure of imagination that, And then further, when people were interested, they were like, they expected someone who's quirky, or kind of cutesy and doddering.
Well, so more like a cozy mystery would fit that, which is also a shame. Like, okay, if it's a Murder, She Wrote episode, it's great.
Right.
Or if it's a sleuth who also quilts and can provide me some recipes, which it all becomes such a cliche.
Right. And that's all fine, but it's like you're obviously not reading the book that is in front of you. Because the thing about getting older, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm old enough to know that I am this myself, but more so.
Right.
I'm nowhere near weedy, but but I'm, I'm way past 40.
Right.
And, I mean, I've learned more, and in some ways the stakes are higher. But I'm not, I haven't suddenly become cute or doddering or any of that. And so the people in the book, they have some frailties, but they're not, they're individuals, and they're people. They're just people who are a little older, and they have agency, which is the other thing,
right?
Right. So yeah, so. It was very interesting to your point. The industry, I think, sometimes has a very narrow view of what the ideal protagonist is, what the ideal setting is, and
right,
and now
it comes down to marketing, I think, because I think, so to be fair to the publishing industry, they realize, I'm going to have to put this on a shelf or online, and it's going to have to someone's going to look at it for 2 seconds and make a determination about whether it's a novel for them. And, the first determination is going to be what category or what genre does it fall in. And if you say it falls in mystery, there are all these expectations and baggage associated with that one word. And so, no one's giving it the benefit of the doubt because everyone's just swiping on their computers or scanning, spines of books. So it is a challenge to be a little bit outside of the perimeter of what's commonly accepted.
Right. And the genre conversation is another worth having, because I didn't really, I mean, it is a mystery. Crooked Lane, who've been wonderful,
Right.
categorizing it as a thriller. But that is not, in my perhaps antiquated view of what a thriller is somebody's in mortal peril and, they're running from an airplane or something.
Right.
But
it's such a diverse definition, and it doesn't really fit into anything. And, I've seen lots of different definitions, but a thriller could be the stakes are just one person. That's usually what I write. It's like it's one person's, and then there's no espionage. It's just this dark, life. And it's very personal and it's very emotional. But is that thrilling? Is it suspense? Mystery, I think, kind of, there's a body on page 1 and there's a resolution at the last page in a way, so it all depends. But yeah, it's tough.
It was tricky. So it was tricky to sell it. A lot of people were interested and got great feedback, but a lot of people were like, I just don't know how to position this.
Yeah.
It kind of doesn't fit neatly in any one thing. Now, of course, since it's been, available for some preview, a number of people have said, I love the fact that this book is set where it's set.
Sure.
I love that it's an older person, because the stakes are different and you don't usually, and it's unusual. It's something different.
Right.
So, so it's this, as you say, there's a sweet spot between giving people what they expect and surprising people in a way that they like.
Yeah. And probably, and usually what happens is it gets marketed one way and it's read another way, and you're going to get a lot of reviews, positive or negative, that says this book isn't what I was expecting.
Exactly.
You're going to see a lot of that. Yeah. So I get a lot of those.
Well, this a thriller.
Right. Yeah. But, the people who think outside the box, the readers who want to kind of just delve into the story, are the ones who get it. And that's the satisfying part. Now, going through doing some research on you have a diverse background in the arts. But as you were growing up in the cold wasteland, the Twin Cities, so you must have been a creative kid. It must have been.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, how did that manifest itself? As a child?
I was always very independent. And independent thinking, and I would be like, everything from mud pies to, I was always making stuff up, making up stories, making things, physically making things, which is not surprising given that I've had a career as a visual artist. So I'd be, like sewing stuff or sculpting stuff or doing whatever. And I had a relative amount of freedom as a kid. So I was able to, we lived right near a big park. I was always sort of messing about with, but I had a very active imagination and a very creative sort of bent. I just love to make stuff.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting to talk to writers who, you think somebody's a writer and that's their creative outlet. And you realize, like, no, a lot of writers, like including myself, I love to work with my hands, because it's funny because even though it's written words, I think we tend to be visual learners and visual experiencers. And so, I'm visualizing my stories, I'm writing it, but I love to build stuff and I don't know how to do it, but I love to watch a YouTube video. I'm like, I'm going to do that. There's something just gratified about it. Now, were you a big reader as a kid?
Yes. Yeah. And an indiscriminate one.
Yeah, right.
If there was a book laying around, I would try to read it.
And then when you got to the point where you wanted to go off to college, did you already have the idea of, like, I need to do something creative, or was somebody trying to talk sense into you?
I should stop right here and say that I have 2 kids, and one of them is an artist. And people have asked the same thing to her. And she's like, well, my mom and dad are artists, so no. but But
Both you and your husband are
yes,
artists. Oh,
right.
wow. Okay.
But my educational background was really so I went to this a high school. It was just really not a very good high school. It was there were some excellent teachers in it, but they were, the school itself, it was, I think, I don't know, maybe 0.01% of us went on to any sort of, you know, post-secondary education at all.
Oh, wow.
I have joked in the past that that my classmates majored in blue eyeshadow and getting pregnant. Yeah. It was that kind of place. And my parents were very pro-education, but neither of them had been to college.
Mhm.
I didn't know there was such a thing as a high school counselor. I didn't.
Oh.
I still don't know if my school had one.
Yeah.
I was always in the art room, and the art teachers were very supportive. But I ended up going to art school because I found a brochure for the Minneapolis College of Art and Design in the trash can. And
So you went the serendipity route.
so I shudder now to think about what that application looked like. I'm sure it had white out all over it.
Yeah. Did you have to send in some kind of portfolio or anything?
Yes, because I like even in high school, I was always making stuff, and my teachers were very supportive. So I, I'm sure they were dreadful photographs, and I'm sure my application had white out all over because I couldn't type very well, and because I did avoid the typing, I managed to do that, and so but I got in
Mhm.
art school. It was again it was a very kind of at the time, I think the curriculum was sort of unformed and very open, and I don't know that it was terribly helpful,
Kind of a
actually.
choose your own adventure kind of
Yeah,
program.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
I think I could have used a little bit more structure and guidance, but anyway, so that's how things kind of began. When I look back at my career, both in art and writing, it's kind of serendipitous and lucky, and also like, how the heck did that happen? Because
Yeah.
I really just sort of stumbled my way through. Compared to what the advantages that my students have now, where we as professors are, really invested in giving them guidance, and they're much more sophisticated. I was so clueless. It was
Right.
like, what,
But
so,
you went on and got into education, and was that kind of immediately, or what was that
um,
path?
well, when I got out of graduate school, I ended up going to graduate school because after undergraduate school, the only kind of jobs I could get had nothing to do with art. And I did, again, I was sort of clueless. I didn't really know. That's what I worked, actually. I did work in a care facility.
Right. Right.
And I began doing art with some of the seniors.
Hmm.
And I thought, I'm just going to apply to some grad school. And I went to the place that gave me the most money, and
Mhm.
which happened to be in Illinois. And I had wanted to kind of, I really always liked Chicago. So after I graduated, I got a job. Um, I realized I wanted to work in a way where I didn't have the same conversations with people who had the same background as me
Mhm.
about art. I wanted to sort of talk to people who were maybe like my family, who were curious and smart, but not expert in any way.
Great.
Well, I took a job I started working in museums,
Okay.
and
That's cool.
yeah, it was really great, actually. I had to do a lot of writing about art, and really writing on a deadline because our turnaround times were really fast. And the word count was really steep, really, really tight, and having to explain some things that, were maybe a little bit esoteric and a very tiny word count. So it was good training, and I really was good at it, and teaching in a gallery. And then I I kind of, you know, s- also kind of by accident stumbled my way into teaching at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is one of the best art schools in the world.
Sure.
I'm really lucky. And I also, found out I was good at it. So I've been doing that for a long time. And at the same time, and it's a very interdisciplinary kind of place. So, then about 10 years ago, I decided I didn't get enough rejection as an artist, so I stopped fiction writing.
So yeah, so I'm curious about that pivot because, as we were talking about, I think a lot of writers or a lot of artists have, a multifaceted, at least a pull towards different types of creative expression. What was that inflection point of going from always maybe thinking a little bit about writing to actually sitting down and writing those first paragraphs?
I don't know. There was a lot of well, I guess, what, I'd always, like I said, done a lot of writing for my work and about art, and, a few little fiction things thrown in there now and then, like short pieces, little prose kind of things, that often lived alongside my visual art that were kind of part of it almost. And then, I don't know, about 12 years ago, an idea for a book just grabbed me by the throat and wouldn't let me.
It's so interesting.
And I just started writing, and I'm also stubborn. And once I decided that I was going to learn how to write a novel and do it, well, then that die was cast. So,
Right.
In between, I was still making and exhibiting artwork. I had a family, and another book came out about my artwork, which was not fiction. So in between, I was doing all these other things, but I never completely stopped, and I just sort of kept banging away at it. And this book is not that first book, but I learned a lot. I did finish that first book. I am sparing myself cringe-worthy embarrassment by I haven't read it in a long time. But I learned a lot.
Right.
From writing it. And so then, this book finally, maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, I started, and, again, was not able to work on it straight through, but
Right.
sort of chip away at it, and it gradually took shape.
Right. Because during that time, you're also learning how to write. You're not a seasoned writer who, okay, on book 12, it's not going to take you 7 or 8 years,
Right.
because and it's interesting with those first books, when you're not under contract, you have to put yourself under a deadline,
Deadline,
or
right.
if not a deadline, then a determination. And you use the word stubborn, which I find fascinating because I've done nearly 100 of these, and so many people say I was determined and I'm stubborn. And I couldn't let it go. But I think there's so many people out there. How many people do you know who will talk about, like, oh, I had a great idea for a story, and they would tell you about it. And it's like, well, how is it that then some people say, I have a great idea for a story and I'm going to actually write it? Because I think that's a huge wall to break through.
Write it and finish it.
And finish it. Right. and it doesn't have to be good, and it probably won't be good.
Right.
But the finishing of it is rare. Like, I'm kind of fascinated by that. Like, what does it take to do this, and why do some people do it but most people don't? But you did it, and what was difficult for you in the actual? Like, were you getting into your head of, like, I got to make sure there's a hero's journey here? All the tropey stuff, not tropey.
No. I really wasn't thinking. In my head, I was thinking more in terms of literary fiction, just because I think it allows you to be a little freer.
Right. You can have older people with literary fiction.
Yeah, and you can focus. You can ignore the kind of, there isn't a body on page one.
Right.
So, but I did like some of the aspects of mysteries or of other things. So I wasn't thinking in terms of those tropes, but I was thinking about, so I eventually kind of figured out what the story behind the story was. And for me, it was about essentially a very good person who kind of loses her who does something really bad,
Yeah.
whose moral compass temporarily goes kaboing, and she does something in some ways really out of character.
Yeah.
And and part of the reason it made sense for her to be older is that I realized that really was the curiosity at the kind of the heart of the book. It's when might somebody do that? Because I think we're all capable of it,
Right.
as much as we'd like to think.
Of course. Yeah.
You know?
And that's what makes for a good book, is somebody empathizing to the point of like, oh shit, that I could totally see me doing that under those circumstances.
Right. Right. You know, it all of us, I think, are capable of stepping from the straight and narrow and doing something that maybe would shock ourselves. But in the right circumstance, in the right moment, you know, we're vulnerable to the devil on our shoulder.
Right.
And it occurred to me that older people, those states are higher for all kinds of reasons, but it might also be more tempting.
Right.
Right. Because people don't suspect older people of being capable of doing anything. You know, they're seen as not having a lot of agency. Older women in particular are kind of culturally invisible.
Right. Right.
And so I realized that was part of really what interested me
Right.
in the book.
Right.
So there's a lot of character development there. And
Sure. And just that by being in a senior living facility, the circumstances by which each individual got there could be varied, they could have been kind of quote unquote forced into it. So their whole mentality might have shifted. You know, you might be much more bold. You might not care as much because of your circumstances.
Right. You might feel immune, like you're beyond consequence.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is fertile ground.
Yeah. So it seemed like that was a really good thing to pursue. And then and then, you know, you also have a certain kind of wisdom of like, God, what did I do? You know?
Right.
And limited sphere of action to be able to come across. But what occurred to me then, and so what followed from that, if that was what interested me, then the trick when you were saying, you know, hero's journey and stuff, what I was grappling with was, so I have to make a character that people will believe
Right.
is capable of doing this thing and believe it when she does it.
Right.
But at the same time, not think that I've broken faith with the reader or that this is, you know, that the book has been a lie, or be like, oh, you know, because I've read books, I'm like, no, you know, I don't buy it.
Right. Well, it's kind of the Walter White Breaking Bad journey from hero to anti-hero, but still, you know, it's tricky because you're still rooting for it. You know, the intentions have to be hopefully valid, even if the outcome or the action was a little bit
right. And in Franny's case, you know, unlike Walter White, she does try to make her way back to herself. And so her journey is sort of also like, you know, trying to redeem herself.
Right.
Particularly when a staff member who she feels responsible for and cares for becomes, you know, blamed.
Right.
So suddenly she's like she's horrified at what she's wrought and has to figure out a way to make it right. So that's kind of where the mystery is how to figure this out, how to
right. Hence 7 years to write the book.
Right. So I wrote the last half of that book. I wrote the last half 3 times.
Yeah. Well, of course. I mean, you know, I wrote my first book without knowing anything about writing. And I had this serendipitous moment where I just started writing one day and I didn't know what I was doing. And that first book actually went quickly. I think mostly because I didn't know what I was doing. And I got an agent with that book, but my first 3 books didn't sell. And each book got progressively more difficult to write because I started to actually learn how to do it. Because you do have to, I feel like you go off your gut so much just to like get it done and just hope your subconscious is working. But then the editing is like, oh yeah, I've got to rewrite this ending 3 times because it doesn't make sense. And you also get, I'm curious to know if you found yourself like you need to you need to show it to somebody and start getting feedback, because you get so blinded by it, either in a good way or a bad way, and you lose all context of the story because you've just been in it so deeply.
Right. I mean, yeah, I did. I had to, um, the first ending was, the first really back half was so completely different that I felt like it was almost like two different stories that I had kind of grafted one to the other. And I realized, and it doesn't really, and I still actually really like the writing that I did for that last half, and I might revisit it at some point and make the front half of the book that it actually is.
Yeah.
But, and then the next time I redid it, I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but it was essentially the same book, but with with one really crucial difference in terms of what happens. And somebody said that they just didn't like that. A number of people said they just weren't, it was too much it made them just like Franny too much. And her redemption story was then just not, they just couldn't see her coming back from.
Yeah.
And also it seemed her action seemed a little bit out of the blue, like it was too extreme.
Yeah.
So then coming off it, and I was really kind of stuck about if I wanted to change it, because the kind of weird quirkiness of the first, and not quirky in a cute way, but it was like it took this very dark kind of turn, and part of it I really sort of still liked. But then I began to think about, okay, to make this decision, what opportunities, if I changed that one central piece, what other opportunities unfold from that change?
Mm-hmm.
And that was really an enlightening. I'm really glad I began to think that way. I don't know where that thought came from, but I'm happy I had it, because it made me think about, that opens up all kinds of other possibilities for other characters. And
totally.
I ended up making the book a lot richer because they had more to do.
Right.
And so then I rewrote that. But yes, I have had one or two people that have been kind of readers in process. I'm reading their work as they're writing it. They're reading mine, and they've been enormously helpful. I can't imagine doing it without that.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I've been in a critique group for about 17 years, and so they'll always see a few chapters, but we only meet once a month. But then to me, there's a certain point where I'm like, I want to just be in my world and finish it before I really share it. I mean, so with my agent, for example, I usually give her the first 50 to 100 pages of something, just so there's no major surprise. But I don't outline, so I can never say this is.
I'm not an outliner either. I'm a pantser, as they say.
Totally. And I mean, I think that's the joy of it for me is, so you were mentioning you figured out the story within the story. And if you're a pantser, that means that organically came about probably halfway through writing your first draft. Like, oh, maybe this is what the story is actually about. And isn't that a wonderful feeling of like, oh, all that shit I learned in English in like 10th grade is starting to pay off. I'm that author where I'm actually expressing things that I wasn't even thinking that I was expressing about.
Yeah, like where did that come from? That's really smart.
Yeah, or you'll have two characters and you realize by the end, you're like, oh, they have all these parallels, and I didn't realize that. But it's meaningful that they have these parallels. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of nice. I hope somebody notices that.
Yeah, it's like the sense of discovery in your own, like messing around in your own head, like where did that come from?
Yeah. So and then after a certain number of books, you just get for me, I get to the point of like, I don't think about the story at all. I just hope my subconscious is working. And it has been. For example, like for whatever reason, almost every first draft of mine without any intention is between 84 and 86,000 words. It just ends and I'm not trying to. I'm like, that's so weird. It's just always there. And I don't know why that is, but I'm like, that's your subconscious telling you, okay, pick it up, slow it down, whatever. So isn't that strange?
Do you have a kind of, well, to that point, for example, when my first draft of a chapter often is, sort of like 1,200 words, which is too short.
Yeah.
But it kind of feels like natural there. And then, when I lash myself to the chair for, it might be kind of skeletal, and I push myself to get to a, 3,500 word chapter. Not that I have some rule that that's how long a chapter has to be.
Right.
Well, if I make myself do that, then it gets a little deeper. But I have this kind of like, the air goes out of the balloon at 1,200
Yeah.
or 200 words. And then I have to say, wait a minute, and reread it and say, oh, I have underwritten this whole paragraph,
Yeah. I mean, I actually find, so I write very short chapters, and I don't do that on purpose. It's just, I'm always feeling the pace in the background, and I might stop a chapter and start the same scene as the next chapter just because it feels good to me. So my book might have 110 chapters in it because of that. But what's the byproduct of that, and you might find this as you start getting feedback, is thriller and mystery readers love short chapters because they'll be reading and they'll be like, oh, this chapter's only 2 more pages. I'll get to the end of this. And then they'll keep reading because there's just these bite-sized pieces, and then they'll like, I was up all night reading it because it was propulsive. So so I get that a lot, but
I like short chapters. I do too.
Yeah, I think you don't need to I think some writers get, especially in the mystery suspense genre, if you get too into your own words. I mean, you could have a wonderful long description, but you can have even a better description if you distilled all that and made it and really distilled it to like 3 potent words that has more of a punch. So, but everyone's different.
Yeah. Well, what I found in writing this is if I make myself get to that 3,500 word chapter, I then end up going back and paring it back.
Right.
But I've gotten to what needs to be there.
Right. It's not the same 1,400 words that were there originally. Right.
No, it isn't. But I needed to get to the 3,000 to get to the final 1,400.
Right. And so now we're just right around the corner from the actual launch itself. So that's got to be very exciting.
It is.
It's got to be surreal.
Oh, absolutely. It's 2 weeks from yesterday. No, 2 weeks from Tuesday. Tuesday.
Yep. They always launch on Tuesdays. I don't know the science behind that, but Tuesdays are when books launch.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's in Minneapolis, my other hometown, at a bookstore called Once Upon a Crime.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And then the Chicago kind of official sort of, party launch is April 6th, 2 weeks from yesterday on a Thursday on Michigan Avenue. So I'm really looking forward to it. And we were talking about the publishing industry, there's writing and then there's the business of publishing. And I really, I got a lot of great feedback, a lot of sort of, people were interested, but nobody really put a ring on it and I was fully, again, I spent a life as an artist, so I'm not that unused to, close the whole cigar and stuff. It's part of the creative life in this world.
Totally.
Rejection.
Yeah.
And having to work a long time to get something out into the world. And so when so I was working on this well into this other book that I keep trying to chip away at, and and we'll circle back around to, I think, when things die down for the release. But I was fully expected to, won a few in progress awards, I won a first chapter award, all that kind of stuff. But I was beginning to think, I might not ever get this entire thing published.
Most people don't. I mean, most finished novels never get published, traditionally published.
Exactly. Or I thought it might end up in a very small, independent publisher, university press, which I would have been thrilled with.
Totally.
Because as you say, most things, there's a lot of really good writers whose work never connects with a publisher.
Yes.
So, to your point about being excited, I was I just couldn't, part of me is like, I can't believe this because I was fully expected to think, okay, I came close with that one, maybe the next one.
Right.
You know? And who knows what will happen with the next one? I mean, there's no guarantees, right?
Totally. Totally. I mean, that's, until a couple books ago where I signed a multiple book contract, I was just writing one book at a time, and I'm like, this is interesting to me. I have no idea if it'll be interesting to any publisher, but this is bringing me happiness as I write it. And, but I think that works out when you do that because you're focused on your story and not focused on, how much is this going to pay me? Will this ever sell? So you're kind of putting your imagination first and letting the rest of the universe kind of fall into place because you have that commitment to a passion.
Right. Because, I mean, it's not like either of us is doing this for the millions, right?
No, no, that's true. That's the eyes wide open part of the industry.
No, I mean, I'm very curious to see what will happen with this next book because Crooked Lane has said that they have the clause in the contract for the first.
You're right at first refusal.
Right
yeah.
at first refusal. And I think it's actually really, I think it's good, but it's not in any way a mystery. And I don't know if it, I don't know that it's even in their wheelhouse. So I would love it because they've been really great to work with.
Yeah.
The editor's been really great. The suggestions she's made were just spot on.
Yeah.
And the support staff and the marketing people, the book, maker people have been great. But we'll see. So I fingers crossed for the next one. But there's really no guarantees.
Yeah, I went through that with the book that's coming out next year. It was more of a episodic tale that wasn't super thrillery. But I was obsessed with this character this 21-year-old female savant. I'm like, I don't know who this person is, but I'm obsessed with this. And it takes place in 1987. And so it went through a lot of rewrites. Not necessarily, hey, let's throw some dead bodies in here, but it's so different than what I had been writing that, to be honest, it was problematic. And it was the most I've ever rewritten. I mean, I actually went from third person past tense to first person present tense.
Wow, that's massive.
And I usually write first person present, but I just didn't think I could get into this person's head close enough. And it turned out that's what I needed to do. But I mean, that's months of, literally every sentence of the story changes, and not just the tense, the voice completely changes.
Probably.
But it was worth it. But it was because I started to go outside the boundary of what I typically write, and it was connecting because of that. So it was a great learning experience for me. And
so you just feel like it was connecting to you, but it wasn't connecting to to the readers that you were asking for, or did you feel like for you, I don't quite have it yet?
Yeah, it's funny. It was connecting to me, but again, you lose all perspective. When I rewrote it first person present, I'm just like, oh, there she is. Like I thought I knew her before, but now I really, here you are. And that was kind of nice. And I was afraid she was going to sound like some of my other first person present tense female characters, but she didn't. And so it worked out, but and you always fall in love, right? And then you fall out of love because you hate it at the end. And then you're just confused about what you want.
Yes.
It's a long process.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a quick little storytelling.
Oh,
I've picked 3 random books from my bookshelf, somewhat random, 3 very disparate books. And you're going to pick one of them. We're going to pick a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that's the first sentence in the short story. You give me maybe the next 1 or 2 sentences, then I'll do a couple, and this will go on for maybe 2 minutes. It'll be very fast, and this can go wherever we want to go. So I have my friend S.F. Kosa's The Night We Burned, Gone with the Wind, and Stephen King's Later. So choose one of those.
Let's do The Night We Burned.
Okay. And then give me a page between.
I don't know that I could be Gone with the Wind without some really cheesy Southern accent.
That would be pretty horrible for both of us. So give me a page between 1 and 300.
198.
And I'm just going to quickly scan and just pick out a sentence here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to read this, and then you take it away unless you want me to go first.
Okay.
There's something weirdly intense about him. It's coming across the table in spiky waves.
She was astonished that the squirrel was staring at her from her fireplace. How had it gotten in, and how had it jumped onto her dining room table without her realizing?
It was almost kind of cute, even though the fact she always considered squirrels to be rats with longer, fluffier tails. But she was still left with the dilemma of what the hell am I going to do with this thing inside my house? She approached it and got within about 5 feet and stayed still. And that's when she noticed the blood on its whiskers.
And that very moment, her cat, Snickerbar, and her dog, Killer, started down the stairs, defeating the child gate that she had put up so she could get some work done. The squirrel froze, the blood spiking, its rat-like, its fluffy tail.
Killer, despite his name, actually froze at the sight of the squirrel and seemed to be a little bit wary of it. Snickerbar, however, seemed to almost froth at the mouth with nervous anticipation, and he only waited for 2 seconds before he pounced.
Oh, God. The squirrel jumped onto, what's her protagonist's name?
Unnamed.
Okay, to Bobby Sue's shoulder, and then from there to her head, and then leapt and swung from the chandelier as Snickerbar howled and mistimed its jump and landed on the curtains, clawing at the linen.
I think we call it there. I don't know where to go else with that.
Maybe we should have ended with the Snickerbar frothing at the mouth and
I don't think in the history of the show we've ever done an animal story. So that's
well, I am proud to know.
That's a first, and that can be the beginning of that next book that you write after the book that you're writing right now. Easy. So you don't have to give me credit or anything.
No.
Well, listen, Rebecca, congratulations. I being a debut author is one about the most exciting things in the world. So I'm living a little vicariously through you, and I know how cool that is, and all the fun that it is to have a book get into the wild and to physically see it in a bookstore, and you're like, that's my name. So congratulations.
I stopped by my local bookstore with AARC to say, I'd be happy to sign some books if you order them, blah, blah. He said, oh, you live near here? I said, yeah. He said, oh, I already have it on order.
Yeah.
And
cool. That's cool.
I was like, yeah, that feels great. He said, I didn't know you lived near here, so let's work out something so I have to go and sign a bunch of books.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like, but he said, oh, I already ordered that. I was like,
that's great. That's great. Awesome. Well, listen, congratulations, and what a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Take care, Rebecca. So that's it. That's my conversation with Rebecca Keller, whose book You Should Have Known is out April 4th. So definitely check that out. And if you want to find out more about her, just go to RebeccaAKeller.com. And if you want to find out more about just go to my website, carterwilson.com. You could sign up for my newsletter. You could see about all my books. If there's no information there yet about this retreat I'm doing, The Gentle Novelist, and you're interested in finally writing that book that you wanted to do, and you want to come to Boulder, Colorado for a few days in August and have an amazing experience, just email me and I'll make sure I get you the information. It's me@carterwilson.com. So that is it for now. Thank you, as always, for watching and or listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I love talking to Rebecca. She was fantastic. More episodes, of course, will be coming out soon. In the meantime, take care.